All righty. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. Great to have you here with us today. You are at Empowering Your Emerging Adult Part 3. Today, we're talking about navigating co-occurring challenges, supporting mental health and substance use together. This is a webinar and learning community conversation presented by the CAFÉ TA Center and facilitated by our friends Kirsten Drybrough and Charlotte Armstrong, to whom I will introduce you shortly, although I think some of you already know them. Speaking of things you already know, if you're new to me and new to CAFÉ TAC, you will have not heard this spiel before. If you have heard it before, my apologies, but you can rate how well I did it this time versus my previous versions. So let me tell you a little about who we are and what we do. The CAFÉ TA Center is a program of the Family Cafe, which is a grassroots cross-disability nonprofit. We're located here in Tallahassee, Florida. The way we address adult mental health is through our SAMHSA-funded Consumer and Consumer Supporter Technical Assistance Center, CAFÉ TAC, or the CAFÉ TA Center. What makes our TA Center unique is that it is not clinical or academic in focus. It's really about lived experience. So everything we do here at CAFÉ TAC is done by and for people with lived experience of mental health conditions or people who are in direct familial relationships with people like that. So it's really not about us talking to you. It's about us talking with you, sharing our experience and our lived expertise. That's kind of the ethos we bring to everything we do across the Family Cafe and definitely what we bring to the TA Center program. Because I get this question sometimes, I'll just mention real quick. CAFE, our name is actually an acronym for Collaboration, Advocacy, Friendship, and Empowerment, which are our founding values. So I get calls with people trying to sell me restaurant equipment, which I don't really want, but nonetheless, CAFÉ TA Center is called CAFÉ for that reason. We encourage you to visit our website, cafeTAcenter.net. You can learn all about our programming there, join our mailing list, and most importantly, you will find a recording of today's session on there, as well as recordings of the previous sessions we've done in the series, other webinars we've done with Charlotte and Kirsten, and a whole training module on family mental health that's in our TAC trainings page on the website. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get to the end of the presentation, so you can check that out. But it's a great resource. We encourage you to visit it. My name is Jeremy Countryman. I am the Vice President of the Family Cafe and the Project Director of CAFÉ TAC. I have with me here today, joining from Hastings, Nebraska, where it's always Christmas, John Ferrone. He's training coordinator on the program. Once I hand it off to Charlotte and Kirsten, John and I will have the role of kind of monitoring what's going on in the chat and any questions that come in through the Q&A to make sure that the issues you bring up get worked into the conversation. Again, we very much encourage your input. This is not intended to be a one-way street. We'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, questions as we go along. You can either put it in the chat, use the Q&A, or if you want to raise your hand, if you have a chance to speak, just go ahead and hit that raise your hand button and I can turn your mic on. As we go along, John and I will be handling all that. So now it's my pleasure to once again welcome our facilitators, Kirsten and Charlotte, two people with a lot of expertise in family mental health and family peer support that they're going to tell you all about right now. My pleasure to have you guys here again. Thanks very much for being here. Welcome, Charlotte and Kirsten.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, John. Kirsten and I always are so happy to spend time with you all at Family Cafe. And it was interesting how many times Kirsten and I are referring to your website for more supports for families, either the recordings or what's coming up. And we really appreciate all that you do for us, the family side of, supports, and keep doing what you're doing. Kirsten and I are thrilled to see some familiar faces as I'm reading, where everybody is coming from. And we're excited to start talking about this, our latest webinar. A little bit about myself and Kirsten. We're family peer supporters and trainers. Our day jobs, we spend training family peer support workers around the world, as well as individuals. We love doing webinars, and we also really love supporting families who are supporting someone who may have poor mental health or substance use issues. And why Kirsten and me? Well, we have, gosh, a lifetime of lived experience supporting our daughters who had poor mental health through middle school and high school. And every story Kristen and I share, our daughters have given us permission to share. They're really proud of the work that we're doing. Kirsten?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Charlotte has shared a little bit about both of us. And one of the things that both Charlotte and I can agree on is supports for the family during our own family mental health story and journey were really absent, completely absent. And that's what has brought both of us to what we do today, changing careers and working, supporting family members who are supporting someone who struggles with poor mental health and or addictions. So everything you hear today is through our lens of lived experience. We're going to share things that may resonate with you, tactics that may work for you, and some maybe not so much, but I'm looking forward to sharing this next webinar with all of you.
Next slide, Jeremy, please. So what is family peer support? And we pulled a definition, and I know for some of you have been on our webinars before we showed this slide, but it really is that lived experience component of what it's like as a caregiver supporting somebody, again, I'm repeating myself, who has poor mental health or substance use. And for Kirsten and I, and for us at the CAFÉ TA Center, we really want to talk about, family to us is whatever family is to you. So it might be that traditional family, or it could be that family of choice. And so when we use that word family, just put in whatever it means to you. Kirsten?
Yeah, you'll hear me use the term loved one, caregiver. Again, family is not held to a traditional model. If you're here and signing in today because somebody that's close to you and is near and dear to you is struggling and you want to be a support to them, you're in the right place.
Next slide, Jeremy, please. So our objectives today, we're going to talk about getting a better understanding of that overlap between mental health challenge and a substance use issue. We're going to talk about some strategies that might work for you and your family, while thinking about that co-occurring challenge, but also really fostering their independence. And then learning how to walk alongside your young adult. As they're looking at what recovery looks like to them, and also supporting your own recovery and well-being. Kirsten?
I think we can move to the next slide.
Okay.
Thanks, Charlotte. So what are co-occurring challenges? It's a combination of two or more health issues, such as a mental health challenge and substance use issues that we will be speaking on today. These conditions interact. Typically, one worsens the other. One can trigger the other, and vice versa. And we're going to look at how they interact together and how we as family members can show up in the best form to support our loved one who's struggling with co-occurring issues. One of the things I want to talk about as well is co-occurring issues can look like, depression with gambling, a mental health issue with an eating disorder. So we're going to touch a little bit on that today, but the focus is absolutely going to be on substance use issues.
And that's one of the things that makes this co-occurring challenge even more challenging, because it shows up so differently for each family, for each individual, for each young adult. And as we go through today, there's not one size fits all, and there's not one way to support this conversation. But the more we have this chat in these webinars, our hope is that you'll find something that might work within your family, or at least have you looking for other options. Kirsten?
Yeah, and one of the things that comes over and over again in the work that we do for both individuals and for the family member is there's a lot of feelings of shame, of guilt, and hopelessness is something we hear a lot of. And I think when it comes to co-occurring challenges, generally folks feel like there's so many fires going on, they're not even sure where to start. And that can be overwhelming for the individual and the family member. So we're hoping when we talk about emerging adults that we can provide some information that supports you in your role and really speaks to you throughout today's webinar. Did you have anything to add, Charlotte?
Yeah, and so just that, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the mental health issue come first, or the substance use challenge, did it come first? And for some people, they figure it out. For others, it's just so interwoven. And as I go along with Kirsten, it's really starting to figure out what you think is going to best work in your family's story. I have, both a mother who struggles with poor mental health and chooses substance use as a support for her. And one of my daughters went through it, using different kinds of substances to support those crazy things that were happening in her head. And when I say crazy, she just wanted her mind to slow down and stop. And she chose different substances. And it was really starting to look at what different tools she could use to change her use of substance use. But we're going to talk about that as we go through. But when you spend, but when you spend time trying to figure out the root cause, you may never find out what that is. Kirsten?
Yeah, I was just going to add one of the things we are also going to touch on today is treatment options and service options. I believe that many of you will find that a lot of our services and a lot of our treatment options are very single track. When I say single track, it means they're offering support for the mental health issue, or you change lanes and you're on another track, and that's offering support for the substance use issue. And also it could be gambling or whatever that is. And I want to bring that up because that's just a challenge that happens over and over again for families. And we're going to share a little bit how to manage that challenge. To be quite honest, I remember being in a service and excited for my daughter to take part in that. And when we got to the final stage of being entered into that program, she was denied because her mental health wasn't well enough to access that service, and vice versa. I've heard from so many families that they're trying to access, and another example, access a service for substance use, for mental health, but the substance use, they have to be clean for so many days or sober for so many days. And the frustration that comes with that, we're going to discuss that a little bit as well, and some options and some language around that for families to use.
Hey, Kirsten and Charlotte, I just want to add to your sort of the discussion scope, this topic, actually this diagnosis. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but anosognosia. It's up in the chat there from Eve, and it's I looked it up. It's basically when a person is unaware of their diagnosis and therefore refusing treatment, and in the simplest definition there. So you're here talking about co-occurring challenges and everything that's really sort of visible and known, and but if you could also just kind of weave that in as part of your thread as you're kind of going through this conversation, that would be helpful. It looks like there's at least a couple people with that topic that they're wanting to know more about.
Yeah, and as you said, John, when the individual is unaware, and I'm even going to add a little bit to that, in my experience, the individual is aware, but is like on a hard denial line and is not open to accepting a service or accepting support. And to be quite honest, that I'm going to say in my family story was probably the biggest challenge. And Charlotte, I'm going to ask you to add on that. That's tough for a family member.
It is tough for a family member, and we talk about that, around the stages of change. And if you think about the stages of change or stages of recovery, in that place where what problem? I don't have a problem, and then as they go through the stages of change, maybe realizing, oh, maybe there is a problem. And so how do we support a family member when they're in that stage of, what problem? There is no problem. I spent a lot of time dragging my daughter from psychologist to clinician to school counselor to you name it. I put her in front of them and trying to make some sense of what was happening for her, and she went reluctantly. So two things happened in that story. One, I was given a neurotic mother label by many different organizations. But two, what happened was she started to believe that she was unfixable. And so when I'm reading some of these things like Nancy, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I just see that you put it out there, and then who else said, as you're exploring ways to try to get your child or your adult child to look at therapy or courses or whatever that looks like, just make sure that messaging isn't coming across that they're unfixable, untreatable. Because in my daughter's story, that message was so loud and clear that she started to believe, well, if nobody can fix me, I'm just going to keep living this life because, why try? And it took a lot of time for her and for all us as a family to rewire that negative label that she had been given. And so one of the things that I started to do with her was change how I spoke to her. And it was more around, I know you've got the power within you to start to work on things that might serve you better than the choices that you're making using substance use. But we're going to continue talking that. I just kind of wanted to direct that to you as well. But Google stages of change, or if it's around recovery or substance use, because there are some tricks or tools that you can use as a family to support somebody when they're in that space. And we're going to talk about a few as we go along.
Just
Real
going to
quick,
add on.
I noticed that Tammy has her hand up. Is it okay if we let her jump in real
Sure.
quick? I'm
We
just gonna.
can't see hands up,
Yeah,
so
I
thank
know
you
you
for
can't,
that.
so that's why I figured I should let you know. So I'm gonna go ahead. You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Tammy, so we can hear you.
Hey, Tammy.
There you go.
We
Hello.
can't hear you. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, sorry, I'm at work, so I can't really be speaking out loud. I didn't mean to address everyone through the microphone, but I just wanted to mention what my interest was in participating today.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and not sure if we're going to touch on any of that, and in terms of not specific to substance, but challenges around other things that are a draw,
Yeah,
for lack,
Tammy,
lack of a better word.
one of the things that the CAFÉ TA Center has given all of you in attendance an opportunity to do some one-on-ones with Kirsten and myself. And I think, as I'm reading in the chat, what, the struggles with your youngest, Kirsten and I would be happy to meet with you and have a chat around that. And that is a little bit part of my wheelhouse, what you're going through. So happy to have
Yeah, I would welcome that to our home. That would be wonderful.
So at the end of, and this goes out to anybody who's in attendance, if you want to meet with Kirsten and I at the end of this webinar, there'll be an opportunity to reach out either through Jeremy at the cafe or Kirsten's, and my email is listed, and we would be happy to make some time for anybody.
Should we go to the next slide, Charlotte?
Sure.
Oh, great conversation that comes up.
I know. So, thinking about substance use challenge, and we wanted to put up these, 4 C's for you to kind of think about, is there these cravings? Is there loss of control or frequency of using? Is there compulsion? And then the consequences part. And what's interesting is you can put this into any, we're using it for substance use, but again, this can fall into, gambling, any of the difference. I was thinking, risky sex is another one that shows up a lot in the work that we do with families. And so really kind of thinking about how that's showing up in your family. Kirsten, did you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add that, when we're talking about co-occurring issues, no family is immune to that. There's no cultural, financial, geographical limits to having this happen within your family. And that's one of the things that Charlotte and I often talk about, especially in our support groups. For anyone who's supporting somebody, an emerging adult, we're going to talk about why it's so complicated with emerging adult as we move on. Finding that community to support the family member and supports for yourself are so valuable, and looking at what's in your area now with Zoom and what we can, how we can sign up for different programs for ourselves and different groups. Really, we get people in our own group that come from all over the globe. So I just wanted to touch on that before we got in there too deep.
Next slide, Jeremy, please.
Okay, so co-occurring challenges with emerging adults, and why is this so complicated for the family that's supporting them? There's so many things that go on with emerging adults, and we're talking about, anyone from 18 to 26, and honestly, it can go past that as far as age goes as well. But we're looking at an emerging adult is moving from that teen time in their life into adulthood. And they're moving from a place where, a lot of their aspects in life were managed for them by their family member, their parents. And now they're having to deal with and manage things for themselves. There's a lot of things that come up as far as, Tammy, you mentioned impulse control. Well, that's very typical in an emerging adult. There's a lot of development still to happen with that frontal lobe. Hormones can shoot people off balance as well. So that definitely impulse control is something that comes up over and over again. They're trying to self-identify, trying to figure out who they are, often in a world that has a lot of pressures. There's social media pressures. There's pressures from their peer groups that are moving forward, and they may not be there. There's pressures, colleges around the corner. There's family pressures. So many things play into why our co-occurring challenge is so difficult with our emerging adults. And something we don't talk enough about when you're looking at that age group, these are also young people that were greatly impacted with those COVID years. So during some of those times where, graduation, high school, all these normal steps were happening, a lot of these young people were isolated with their thoughts. And mental health was really impacted during those years, not only for emerging adults all over our globe. Charlotte, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit.
No, and we wanted to tell you just a couple of stats. 1 in 4, I know a lot of you have probably heard this stat, 1 in 4 will struggle with poor mental health at one point or another in their life. when you talk about anxiety, again, 1 in 4 of all the people in the world will struggle with anxiety at one point in their life. But of those people struggling with anxiety, 24%, so, a fourth of the population who has anxiety are going to struggle with a substance use. Major depression, again, it's like 1 in 4, 20% of the population in one point in their life will go through some sort of a major depression. From that, again, a fourth, 24% will struggle with substance use. When you get into bipolar and schizophrenia diagnosis, it gets a little bit higher. So bipolar disorder, the population, it's about 1 or 2% of the entire population will be diagnosed with bipolar. But of that, 56% will struggle with substance use. And in schizophrenia, again, it's a very low percentage, 1% of the population. And again, almost half of them will struggle with substance use. And so the reason we share that is, statistically, it's going to show up if you have one of those diagnoses. And how do you manage both of them? And I wanted just to go back to Janelle in the chat, put something about maybe a denial around a diagnosis. And that happened in my family. My daughter didn't like what the doctors had told her she had. And I put that out there because is that denial, or is that just, hey, listen, I'm not excited about that definition or that label. I'm going to call it something different. I spent a lot of time as her mom wanting to know what she had and how we were going to fix her. And she fought me on, I don't like what they say I have. I think I have something different. So if you ask her, and she may or may not tell you all the different diagnoses, including neurotic mom was one of the things that she was diagnosed with. But she'll tell you, she says, you know what, I have high anxiety with a touch of depression. And that works for her. And that's how she defines it. And so if you are like who I used to be and really tunneled in on finding that fix or that diagnosis, and you're getting challenged from your child or your adult child, is there a different way you can talk to them about that? Kirsten?
Hey, I want to poke you a little bit, Charlotte.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Poke me.
So we often talk in our work about how you and I both were fix, save, and solvers. That's something that we did often. So you talked about how you were looking as a family member or parent, you were looking for a diagnosis.
Yes.
Can you explain what you felt would happen if you got that diagnosis, or your daughter got that diagnosis? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
So in my, I'll call it naivety, I was expecting to be told what she had, then medication and proper psychiatric treatment would happen, and life would go back to exactly the way I had dreamt our life to be. In school, going on to university, all of those things that you dreamt that you wanted for your child. And that's what I truly believed is what I was looking for. And that if I just worked a little harder, I would find that magic fix and life would go back to the way I dreamt it would be. And it didn't happen that way. And I think that if I had had some more supports for myself back then, so that I could better support myself and be a little bit more flexible and not be so rigid in what I was searching for. Because, for all of you out there who are saying, yeah, but you don't have what's going on in my house. I truly believe that she wouldn't make it to 20, that she would never find a relationship, stability, or joy. And she turned 30 this year, and she's happily married to an amazing man, and she lives a great life. So it is possible. And if I was talking to myself 15 years ago or 18 years ago, I would have argued with me saying there's no way that's going to happen in my house. So again, it's just, I needed to be a little bit more flexible.
Thank you, Charlotte. I knew you were, our minds think alike, so I knew where you were going with that. And I too, going back in time, felt if I could find the diagnosis or get her in front of the right person, although she wasn't open to it, to receive a diagnosis, then in turn the antidote would be handed to me and life could go back to normal. And it was very much not that way. But before we move on, I just want to touch on some of the stats here and the notes on the slide. 20% of emerging adults that struggle with a mental health challenge will also struggle with substance use issues. That's a lot. We know that substance use can worsen your one's mental health challenges, and it can even mask the symptoms. Emerging adults in our demographic, emerging adults are more likely to self-medicate with a substance to relieve something that they are uncomfortable, to mask a pain. Substance use medication can make the substance use can have medication not work. I have seen that over and over again. My daughter, again, she gives us permission to speak about our family story, and she's really proud of what Charlotte and I do. But she lives with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and she, by choice, takes medication, and she loves how she feels. She also tries to act like she's can keep up with her friends with little sleep and a 20-something-year-old, up late, lots of drinks during certain periods of celebration, and 100% her medication is not as effective, and she will be the one to recognize it now. I used to have to point it out to her. And it's just truth. Emerging adults with co-occurring challenges will likely have significant struggles with school, jobs, social connections, friends, family relationships. It becomes a plethora of issues. And I talked about earlier about all the fires that can be lit in an emerging adult who's struggling with poor mental health and substance use, and how overwhelming that can be, where to even start. And that's being that vulnerable stage of life where you're just trying to figure things out and nothing is going your way because of your poor mental health and substance use combined. Did you want to add anything when we move on, Charlotte?
Yeah. So Kirsten, when you were talking about, alcohol and medication, one of the other places I had to bend was, I'll date myself. When it was in high school in the 80s, grew up where marijuana was illegal and, messed with your mind. And so that was a very strong narrative in my head. And my daughter's an artist. She didn't enjoy being on medication because it squashed her creativity. So she chose coping strategies or different ways to quieten her head with things that I believed to be bad. So, I'll use marijuana as an example. Where I ended up having to go and be in my discomfort is her and I took a trip to a cannabis store, and I learned about cannabis, and she learned about cannabis, and her and I had conversations about it. So the reason I share that is I had to let go of being closed-minded and have conversations. But what happened with that is she in turn learned that were different kinds of ways that she could support herself without using cannabis that gave her hallucinations. And so she tried CBD oil. She tried things that just calmed her head, that didn't have that same THC levels that come with marijuana. But when I was so hard and rigid with how I showed up around cannabis, it closed our conversation and our connection. She doesn't use that today. She's found other ways to support her mental health, but this was a really, really trying time. And so I'll encourage you all, if there's opportunities to have conversation with your young emerging adult, can you open your head a little bit more to hear what they're saying instead of being so closed-minded like I was during the day?
Hey, and one of my favorite lines when you're having those conversations, because I too was like black and white, not in this house over my dead body. And that would be my response to a lot of things that was put forth. Um, I wish I was, more curious and asked more about. So tell me more about that. And no, I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me a little bit more? And what about this? But anyways, that's something that I learned a lot longer in my family mental health story. And I wish I had a family member who had gone through something like we were going through in our home to kind of point out a few things, because I was very rigid, and nothing is black and white.
And and we're not anti or pro medication. We're not anti or pro cannabis. We're just really pro having curious conversations with our children and being mindful of those hard and rigid ways of thinking that both of us had back then. Jeremy, the next slide, please.
I was going to say that's the perfect introduction to the next slide. Finding support for the family. So at All In Family, which is a nonprofit that Charlotte and I co-founded, where we have free resources and support groups for family members, we wholeheartedly believe that when one person in the family is struggling with a mental health challenge or substance use issue, the entire family is struggling. And that's something that before my family started our mental health journey, I was completely unaware of, and I just did not get at all. To take it a little bit further, we talked earlier on about how to manage somebody when they're in denial, when they're not accepting that there's an issue. I can't pronounce that word, although I certainly know what it means. The only thing that we can control in our family mental health story is how we show up and how we support the family member who's struggling. And both Charlotte and I spent many years trying to control every aspect of our daughters, or I certainly tried to control every aspect of my daughter. And change happened when I started to let go of that and realize I was never going to get anywhere, although I tried very hard, and started to look inward and be intentional with my own actions and tried to do things differently with how I showed up. So when I kind of showed up a different version of myself, or just solely focused on my own actions, my own boundaries, what worked and did not work for me, and not putting bricks and boundaries around every move my daughter made, that is when I started to see change in her actions. Did you want to speak on that a little bit, Charlotte?
And it was for both of us, Kirsten and myself, we were so wound up that often when we were asking what's happening for our kids, they were seeing that frantic, anxious, nervous, scared mom. And they were like, yeah, nothing, I don't want to go there, because they already knew the reaction they were going to get from us. And when Kirsten talks about being intentional in our actions, I had to start to look at how I was showing up and how I was receiving information from her. And one of the things that happened was when I asked how she was doing versus when she was open to share what was happening for her. So we were on two totally different schedules. So I would be like, let's talk about what's going on with you at 11 in the morning, which I thought was a reasonable time. she was more comfortable having those hard conversations with me after 10 o'clock at night. Now, Kirsten mentioned the only person we can change is ourselves. So for me to want to know what was happening for her, I had to stay up later and have those conversations with her on her schedule. And that wasn't me bending to her. That was when I found she was most open to having those hard conversations. So again, just kind of starting to look at how you're showing up. And this is where that slide in front of you, finding support for yourself. Kirsten and I wish there was something around when we were struggling. There wasn't. So we did a lot of hit or miss. I truly believe that the two of us, if we had met each other years ago and were this version of ourselves, helping ourselves back then, it would have, what, 2 or 3 years of turmoil would have been reduced. Wouldn't you say, Kirsten?
You know, totally. And you know, I heard a reference the other day. I was reading something, and it talked about how to look at your own nervous system, your own wellness as a family supporter, a parent, and really check in with that, because you're setting the temperature, the emotional temperature, the emotional stability or stability temperature in the family. So again, if I showed up a fractured version of myself during those years where I tried to control every aspect in my daughter's life, and I wasn't looking inward at how I was not okay, or looking at changing my own ways. So my temperature that I was bringing to the family mental health story was super anxious, super exhausted. And you know, if something dropped or a phone rang, I jumped. I just wasn't a well version of myself. And I don't even know if back then I'd be open to a conversation if somebody had pointed that out to me. But it's something to think about. It's really something to think about. Yeah. Should we move on to the next slide?
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Jeremy. So some strategies. We thought we would list a few. We've talked about those having a non-judgmental approach. And so Kirsten and I have talked about we had to change how we were showing up. And there was a lot of walking away, deep breathing to really work on this. And the reason why we stress this, we can still have our opinions. I'm not saying that. But is there a way that you can show up that allows the judgment not to be leading it? You know, so thinking about that curious, not furious. I love that line because I was coming in judgmental and furious half the time. And why wouldn't she open up to me? Well, that's the version of the mom that she was getting. And so, and I'm not putting you on the spot, Rachel, but as I read, you know, kids do lie. It's easy. They, you know, I'm fine, or no, I went to school, all of the things that they're saying, because they don't want the consequences of what will happen, you know, when we find out it isn't true. But I did start to change how I addressed her when I caught her in a lie, because that was on her. And when I stopped being furious, she didn't know what to do with me, because she knew what I would do when I was mad. But when I stopped being mad, she didn't know what to expect next. And so that curious, not furious is a really interesting approach. Chris and I call it a dance. You know, if you ask a question and they give this response and then you give this response back, they know the dance. They know what to expect from you. So when I stopped showing up furious, she didn't know what to do. And a lot of the behaviors started to change. Using supportive language, you know, acknowledging it sounds like a hard day. Instead of, you know, you think that was hard. Imagine what I had to go through back before cell phones when I was growing up. Just really validating, even though if you don't understand what's happening, just validating the experience that they're sharing with you. Not jumping in to fix them. You know, that sounds really hard. Is there something I can do to support you in this? Versus let me tell you what to do. Not giving them the answer. You know, I don't know what the answer should be for you, but I'm happy to support you as you start to think about what that is for you. Again, Kirsten and I were so big into trying to fix, save, and solve them. Because really, you want to foster their independence, empower them to make those decisions, and include hope in how you show up. It's when our messaging is changed to, you can't do life without me, and I don't believe that you have the power inside of you. That's when you start to see them not want to take a try. You know, educate yourself. I had to learn about cannabis. Gosh, that was hard for me. But I had to be open to have that learning so I could have a conversation with her. Active listening. Are you listening to tell them what you think they should do? Or are you actually listening to listen? There's difference. If you're jumping in immediately after they finish talking, have you actually heard what they said? So I'm really intentional with some curious questions, pausing before I answer. Kirsten, where are you at with this list?
Yeah, I'm gonna continue a little bit. I'm gonna first address Rachel put a little note in the chat. And Rachel, I have to say, Charlotte and I were guests on a podcast the other night, and it's called Three Moms in the Trenches. You can find it on YouTube, just the audio on podcast as well. Anyways, these three moms had sons in their 40s that all lived with schizophrenia, and the topic of cannabis use, that there's some of them, a couple of the moms are still struggling, but I'm just putting it out there because I think it would be a great resource for you. And as soon as I read your question, that's where my head went. So I wanted to share that. Supporting self-determination. So supporting self-determination is looking at what works for them, or listening to what works for the emerging adult you're supporting. My daughter lives in wellness today. Is it exactly all the choices that I would have chosen for her? Nope. Has she taken responsibility for her health, both physical and mental, and is financially independent? Absolutely. And she's living life in recovery defined by her, not by me, and it's working. So supporting self-determination, that's something to consider. Defining your boundaries, what will and will not work for you. I touched on this briefly. Boundaries are exactly that, boundaries for us. They tell your loved one what works and does not work for us. They define a line in the sand, not a brick wall. And it's not putting a boundary around the actions of your emerging adult that you're trying to support. That's the only way it will work. Be empathetic.
Kirsten, while you're talking about boundaries, Nancy in the chat was talking about supporting financially. And we're not going to tell you what to do, Nancy, but there's ways that we talk about, what you're willing to do. So Kirsten, do you want to talk on that?
Yeah, and that comes down to having conversations and through your own actions, keeping the communication open with your emerging adult, and then letting them know moving forward what you are prepared and not prepared to do financially. Perhaps you can frame it that your own bank account is really hurting and this is not sustainable. Not only is your own wellness, your own mental health in the toilet, but you cannot sustain this financially. So, and when you have those conversations, it's not something that happens tomorrow. It's giving your loved one due notice that, whatever works for you as of this date, it's not blindsiding them. It's letting them know that at this date, you cannot continue to financially support them the way they were. And perhaps if they want to discuss options and problem solve how they can step into being more financially responsible or creating more finances in their world, you're open to having that conversation with them, but you can't carry that burden any longer. And again,
And I think this is where Kirsten and I, when we weren't good at boundaries, we would flip-flop because we had that bleeding heart. And we knew that if our daughters knew that if they cried enough and they put that they're going to be homeless card on the table, that we would pay their bills. And so this is where we had to do a lot of work on ourselves in order to hold that place. And what happened is they both ended up getting jobs and they take care of themselves now. They're financially responsible. And we had to learn how to sit in that fear and that discomfort as their moms.
And again, that's not black and white, and it's not one size fits all in any way. It's what works for you, at the end of the day, what you can live with, and what helps you sleep at night. But also being very aware that making tough decisions financially that has your loved one looking inward to look at their own resources, look at their own resiliency to figure things out, and struggle. So as the parent, as the caregiving, you're watching your young emerging adult struggle. It's a hard place to sit for a parent. It's not easy. I'm just giving you a little heads up that sometimes it's often worth it. We often refer to that sitting in our own anxiety and doing nothing, which is the hardest thing to do. But in reality, doing nothing actually means looking for your own support. In my case, that would be calling Charlotte, running things by her again, telling her how I'm about to make this decision or cave on this after I set a boundary. And her having that conversation with me and supporting me from a lived experience platform where she really got it. It wasn't my neighbor or my good friends who didn't understand my world at all because they didn't live it, but it's finding those supports for yourself and leaning on those supports. So your intentions of following through or whatever that may look like, you have supports when you want to shift things. Hope that wasn't too rambly, but that's a hot topic for me.
Another thing that came up in the chat, if you were keeping up with it, I'll jump in for you.
Yeah.
And this touches on the whole issue of, having your own boundaries, but at the same time, you want to sort of meet the person you're taking care of where they are and be open-minded and open-hearted. A couple people asking about how you deal with the issue of substance use in the home. A lot of people will say, kind of like Charlotte was referring to earlier, like, okay, I have a red line. You're not going to do X at my house. But at the same time, you have the phenomenon where people might be self-medicating or saying, oh, I need to use substance X to deal with these mental health symptoms, and it's the only thing I work. How do you sort of advise people to strike the right balance in navigating that issue?
I'd love to jump on that one. And I'm just being mindful of time, so I'll try not to get too stuck here. First of all, when it comes to providing finances, there's also mothering, and there's also being kind, and that comes into play as well. sometimes we get into that black and white thinking, and providing a warm coat, or whatever it is that you're providing to someone, to your emerging adult, doesn't mean it's not a hard line where you actually provide nothing, no finances, one or the other. Going back to drug use in the home, if you're cohabitating with your emerging adult, from my experience and my suggestion is approaching it in the sense that they are an adult. They can make their own choices. It's their decision. You can't control what they do outside your home. You can let them know that you don't approve of it and it's not cool. However, recognize and touch on that's your choice. I can't control that. When you do this, when you have drug use in the home, now you're making it my problem, because this is my home. This is where I live with, the rest of the family. There could be other siblings. And this is not going to work and is not sustainable long term. So when you start playing with not trying to control every aspect of their life, but just letting them know that if this is what you choose, I can't control that. I know that. I don't agree with it. I'm not even going to try to control it. But in our home, in my home, this is not going to work. So just take that outside, wherever you want to do it. Just respectfully, I ask that you do not bring this into our home. That's my advice.
Well, and one of the things that I want you to consider, if there's two adults living in the house, that you both are on the same page. So some families we support, their children are allowed to smoke in the garage, not in the house. Some families are not on the property. It's really a conscious decision that you, as a family, like the two adults in your house or the one adult, you decide and you stick to it. Because I know in my daughter's case, she knew how to play, her father and me, depending on what she needed. And she would go to one of us or the other. And so I really encourage you to have a conversation if there's two adults in the house on how you want to handle this and show up as a unit. I have a daughter who smokes cigarettes, not in my house. Why is that different if you're allowing, cannabis to be smoked in your house, but you won't allow cigarettes? Again, just having those conversations with yourself or with an adult. And so I have a house that is no smoking, whether it's cigarettes, cannabis, or any of those things. That's something that we, my husband and I have decided, and we pay the bills in that house. At the end of the day, that's where it comes from. But really try to be on the same page and stick to that choice that you make, especially if you're paying all the bills. If you're living in their house and they're paying all the bills and they choose to do cannabis, that's a different story.
Before we move to the next slide, I just wanted to touch base on, Connie made a comment that, before you set a boundary and share that boundary with your emerging adult, really think about it, because, staying firm and true to that, you can't be, if it gets wishy-washy and you're breaking things that you shared in the past, it's really hard to hold a boundary in the future. And another thing, I love what you put, Jeremy, you said, ask the authentic why instead of the hard no. That's being downright curious. I love that. And if we can go to the next slide, please.
Great conversation in the chat. I was getting a little distracted reading it. And if we've missed anything, please, you put your hand up towards the end, because we're really trying to see everybody. I wanted to really talk about the words recovery and relapse, and how recovery shows up. And so when I used to think of the word recovery, it went hand in hand with abstinence. And recovery really is about building a sustainable and meaningful life defined by that individual. So recovery is very personal to the person that's choosing to use that word. What's interesting is back in the day, if someone asked me about that word recovery, I never would have thought about it from my perspective of what recovery looked like for me. It was always about, my daughter or my mother, and abstinence was attached with that word. And so, my challenge for all of you is to think about, how do you define recovery? How do you define it for yourself, but also for your family member? And is it attached to that word abstinence? Because at the end of the day, if you're wanting them to build a sustainable and meaningful life defined by them, what if it includes something that wouldn't define abstinence into that?
Okay, can I ask you a question, Charlotte?
Yep.
We both know a gentleman who is from Vancouver and how he defines recovery. Do you know who I'm talking about?
You
Just
keep
share.
going.
I'll just share the story. Charlotte and I, through our peer training, we met a lovely man who lived on the streets of Vancouver for many years and was a meth addict. And today he works in different organizations where there's non-housed individuals, and he's a support there. But he also has a beer once in a while, and he enjoys drinking beer. And so a perfect example how recovery defined by him is he likes a cold beer, right?
Yeah. And, so he went from using meth to having a beer. And so again, thinking about a little bit of a flexibility in the way you think. Relapse for me is not a bad word because it's part of their recovery journey. So when my daughter was trying different coping strategies, some people would call that relapse. Or was it just her checking out what worked for her and what didn't? So again, how are you defining that? Are you putting that negative slant on it? So one of the things that Kirsten and I talk about is, if in your family, hard times happen, maybe, they went back and was using something again. Do you have a support network in place to support you so that you're not feeling that negative shame and blame associated often with that word relapse? Because for both Kirsten and I, when our daughters chose coping strategies that would have been labeled a relapse, it was part of their journey to figure out what they needed to do to build a sustainable and meaningful life.
I'm just
Kirsten?
going to quickly add to that before we move on. I like to call it a lapse. Somehow it sounds cuter. Exactly that. The journey of recovery is likely going to have moments of relapse and lapses. And for the family member who's supporting that individual, a couple of things I just wanted to share. All is not lost in a moment or a day. Because for ourselves as that family member, wow, our legs are taken out from under us. And early on in my family story, when something like this would happen, I was an absolute mess, and all the work I did at supporting myself, I could just instantly have myself back in the darkest of times. In the reality, I wish I would have shown up in the way to support my daughter with, what happens after last night is up to you. You've got some choices to make. It's about learning resilience, and it's about encouraging them to get back on track, or not to just throw the towel in completely, because it really, really is often just simply a component of the recovery process. It's a learning platform, right? And I don't mean to make light of it, because I know how upsetting that can be, but I wish I showed up in a different version of myself when those moments happened, because I was a mess myself. Should we go on to the next?
We're going to go to the next slide, please.
And before I dive into this one of the things I wanted to touch on in my notes was integrated care. When we talked about how we're going to discuss treatment options, integrated care is typically a word that comes up often in the treatment services. And that's when they treat both the mental health issue and the substance issue together simultaneously under the same umbrella in the same org, and it's not separated. So I just wanted to share that as you move forward as a supporter, because as we talked earlier, language is really important, and that's something you're going to hear when you're looking at services, integrated care. I wish I knew that earlier on as well.
Yeah. And then
Go ahead, Cheryl.
just to further that, it's I know we've got people from US, people from Canada. It's really hard navigating the mental health and substance use systems in both countries. We hear that all the time. Things are siloed. It's really hard to find it. Which ones do we pick? The substance use track or the mental health track? Oh, and Jamaica we're getting to. And the reason I bring that up is as we educate ourselves, just asking those questions. Is this something that you're looking at treating both the mental health side and the substance use side? And talking to other families. I know we're going to plug family peer support, but family peer support groups are a great resource for sharing what's worked in other communities and other families. And it's still hard to navigate, but you got a fighting chance when you've got some other families on the call saying, have you thought of this? Have you tried this? Both Kirsten and I tried treatment facilities for our daughters that had both. And it was really hard to find them, but they do exist.
And for both of us, our stories are so similar, but that treatment center and that time in treatment was part of the recovery journey. It wasn't the answer. It wasn't the end. It wasn't the end at all. But it was a really important component of, for myself, of my daughter's recovery journey. Yeah.
And and I'll just add one part, and why it was so important is both places made the parents do a lot of work too. It wasn't just our children having to do all the work.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Charlotte, Kirsten, can I just jump in real quick, and I'm just wondering if I can add maybe a little bit of a thread in the remaining time that we have.
Yeah.
In the chat, I had posted a question about this. Oh gosh, what do I want to explain here? Everybody's unique, everybody's different, right? So as a parent, each parent or adult who's on this call right now today, this webinar, they're going to hear and see and do things differently just because they are wired uniquely, right? So my question was to the effect, how advantageous is it to know yourself, whether it's through, let's say, a Myers-Briggs personality test or DISC or something like that, and a strengths finder, and kind of understanding your own real personality wiring and your top strengths to then help you approach different situations? And have you dealt with that? Have you ever leveraged that kind of tool and seen that work? Just curious. And I don't know if that's helpful to weave into some of the tools that you're talking about, and because everybody's different, but knowing yourself,
everybody's different.
The battle, right?
You know, I'm smiling, John, because in our peer training, so if you take training from the organizations that Kirsten and I work for, we use DISC. And so we teach family peer supporters to be mindful of what DISC is, and it's around how people communicate. And we all have different ways we communicate. And so, for example, D stands for dominant. If you're the dominant type personality, communication styles like, just tell me all the facts. And if your child is wired C, conscientious, they're going to have to go into every single detail of what's happening for them. And for us, if you have the D type communication style, it takes a lot to listen to them because it takes the conscientious a lot more words to explain what's happening. And so the reason that's great for us as family members to learn about that is if we can't change the way our children communicate, but we can learn about which ones we have to work a little harder to hear. And so whether it's Myers-Briggs or DISC, just learning how you communicate can be a game changer in how you chat with your child, especially if you have two absolutely contradicting ways. If you are the one that has a lot more words to say and your child is just tell me the facts, maybe that's why they're tuning out. And again, you can't make them change to listen to the way you talk. You can adjust how you communicate. John, you came off mute.
Yeah, I was going to add that, we did this as a family and it provided a bridge to, we were talking earlier about how it's difficult in some cases to get your child or maybe one of the supporters to acknowledge the challenge that's there. And so rather than, in this case, rather than let's go talk to a counselor or a therapist, hey, here's a fun assessment tool that just is about you. Let's all take it. I'm going to take it, you take it, and we can be friends, right? So we all took it, and it gave us an opportunity to talk about ourselves and understand each other as well. And it also created the baseline to say, see, there are things that you can do and things you can talk about or learn about that have nothing to do with changing you or judging you or trying to push you in a direction or anything like that. But don't you kind of see in this example how when we were talking about things, we did learn a couple things and it was kind of fun. And so I just throw that out there. It might be an interesting exercise for families to do together. And there's a lot of free stuff online too that you can do. You don't have to buy these tools, but just a strategy to consider.
We also as a family did Enneagram, and that's around values, and that was a great conversation night because people assumed, my youngest daughter assumed her and I were the same in Enneagram, and it turned out that I have more purpose-driven values. That's why, I co-founded a nonprofit, and she was more results values. And so great conversations as a family. So like John said, maybe something like this will work in yours. Kirsten?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I love this conversation. And it ties into how the reality is we all play a part in the family mental health story. And when you can put us on a level playing field, and it's not like the family standing around looking at one person pointing a finger and asking them to make all the change and do the heavy lifting. But when you come together at like these exercises you just shared and look at the family and each part the family plays and the family personalities, I love that you brought that up, John. So thank you. And before we open it to questions, I'm not going to read this, but this will be on the website, our webinar, and this slide. It's the family recovery definition put out by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And if you have a moment, have a look. It's something that for myself and our own family story really resonated with me. And it actually not only gave me permission to realize it was okay not to be okay, because I was really struggling. But I also, as a supporter, had my own recovery to think about, and it wasn't tethered to my daughter's recovery journey. Our lives matter as well, and to look at our own wellness and to really embrace our own recovery. It's something I hope you all just take some time and look at. And I'll leave it there because I know we have questions period coming up. So did you want to add, Charlotte?
Or just our last slide, Jeremy. Kirsten and I just love this message. Autonomy is an individual's capacity for self-determination and self-government. At the end of the day, us as parents, what do we want? We want our kids to be living a life that they're, self-determination, that self-governance. And is there things that we can do to keep that message that we believe in them? They've got the power to figure this out. We're here to support you while we validate the experiences that they're having at this time. Kirsten?
And I think we'll leave it right there.
Hey, Jeremy.
There
Have
it
we
is.
missed any questions? I'm just
I
looking.
was just looking for the unmute thing. I couldn't find it for a second. It disappeared. Yeah, I guess there's no direct questions that weren't really addressed yet, but at this point, we got about 10 minutes left, so happy to take any questions anybody has in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and ask something, definitely love to hear from you. Cool things going on in the chat. It's really nice to see, some of the people having similar experiences are just able to share about them and, kind of acknowledge each other. And oftentimes, as I'm sure, you guys have mentioned a lot of times in our conversations about family mental health, it can be an isolating experience. You often feel like, oh, my family's weird and has all these problems, and everybody else's family is normal and happy, at least on Facebook. And, it's just great to see that people are connecting and being able to say, oh, I'm going through the same problem and I understand how it's hard, because it's hard for me too. And, I hear and see you. Tammy just asked about
Yeah,
setting up sessions with Charlotte and Kirsten. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and how it works, I'll go to the slide with your email addresses on it too while we're doing that.
so Tammy, we'd be happy to meet with you and your husband. And my hope is that maybe your son would like to try individual peer support. So when my daughter met a peer worker who was going through something similar to her, she found she truly didn't think that existed. And they connected on that level of shared lived experience. And so Kirsten's and my lived experience is supporting moms and dads.
I just wanted to add, again, going back to the emerging adult and why are things so difficult when it's, that young adult, that emerging adult. Again, like if your family's in the trenches and you're feeling hopeless, and you are not alone. And there's supports and services to support yourself. And it's such a common story. We hear it all the time, especially, that 18 to 20, late 20s, and often further on. Just a really complex time. Both Charlotte and I can speak for my own daughter. She lives, on the other side of the country to where I live. And she's living a life defined by her, and she's happy. And, if you asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said, no way. Like, I don't believe you, or please sign the contract. I got to get that in writing because that's never going to happen. But it does. You persevere. It does. It surprises you, but please hold hope.
One thing that occurred to me earlier that we didn't really go into that much that I thought if we have a couple of minutes might circle back to. I think towards the beginning, we were talking about how oftentimes, the caregiver or parent will come in and say, oh, I want to solve this. There has to be like kind of what Charlotte was describing at the beginning of her journey, where you say, oh, this is a discrete problem. So I'm going to find the solution and I'm going to find out the problem is X and the solution for X is this particular treatment, made a medication or something like that. Um, and how that kind of, wasn't a really effective approach. I'm curious about your thoughts about how much stock people put in the idea of diagnosis. I think in a lot of these conversations, I've seen where people will think, oh, if I get a diagnosis, then I'll have a label for this problem and I'll know what the problem is. And that's the sort of lens through which I should approach everything. And that's the key that's going to allow my family to resolve these issues. But when we get into a lot of the conversations we have in these webinars, we talk about the fact that it's really more about communication and understanding and active listening and really hearing what the other person's experience is. And sometimes, you don't necessarily have to have a label or a diagnosis or a clinical category to have those conversations about, what's going on with you, why do you feel this way, what are you experiencing? Do you find that diagnosis kind of plays an outsized role in people's approaches to these kinds of family dynamics? Or do you think they're useful in some way? Like, how would you recommend people think about the idea of sort of clinical diagnoses as a way to approach co-occurring disorders, and whether or not that's, a helpful lens to look at the situation through?
I'm going to start this, and I'm mindful we only have 5 minutes. This is a longer than 5 minute conversation.
Sorry.
I'm going to start with, I have multiple friends who have a bipolar diagnosis, and it looks so different to all of them. So if you are looking at a diagnosis, say of bipolar or schizophrenia, and then you're reading the description, it shows up so many different ways. I have some friends who work in mental health who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, running organizations. So there's lots of people who live a meaningful life with that diagnosis, and some who are really, really struggling. So it's on this continuum. Is it serving the purpose of is it serving the person having that diagnosis? So if I was pushing on my daughter, no, you need to have that. That's your diagnosis. That defines who you are. What's that message for her? She's chosen to say what she has. Got some high anxiety with a touch of depression. Different doctors told her different. That's the one that resonated with her. Kirsten, you want to tell your side of the diagnosis story?
The diagnosis, it's very personal. Some folks really connect with a diagnosis. Some individuals overconnect and find they have limitations because of the diagnosis. It's very personal for every person, but I'll just tell a very quick story. My daughter lives with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And so when she refers to herself as I'm bipolar, I was very quick to jump in and say, oh, no. You have bipolar disorder. You're not bipolar. And I would correct her because I wanted her to think of it in what I thought of a healthier way. This went on for a while. And then one day she snapped at me and she said, why are you correcting me? Why are you so ashamed that I'm bipolar? So her language, she wanted to own it. She shares her diagnosis with very few people, and that's her choice with who she chooses to share that with. But she's also somewhat proud of what she's gone through, what she's figured out. She also will say, I've seen some really cool things and done some crazy things that most people will never see or do because I'm bipolar. So what I thought was helping with my language was actually creating more shame for her and throwing her off her balance. So very personal.
Yeah, so if you have a diagnosis, you get to choose how you define yourself. If you're pushing a diagnosis on a family member, what is the intention behind why you're doing it? And so you can think of that word addict or alcoholic. Is that serving the person that you might be calling them that? Or is that something that they call themselves? just something for you all to think about. And I know there's psychiatrists and psychologists out there that are choosing not to give diagnosis. They're choosing to listen to what the person has and support them around what that looks like, as opposed to, oh, you have this and therefore these are the things that you need to do. So it's personal, like Kirsten and I have saying.
Great, thanks for that. Well, we're coming up towards the end, and before we go, I just wanted to touch on this slide because one of the things that Charlotte and Kirsten have done for us is put together this really cool training series. It's available on our website. You can see the direct link to it right there. But if you just go to cafetacenter.net and click on the choice in the menu there for our trainings, you'll find it there as well. There's a 5-part video series that covers pretty much the full gamut of issues related to supporting a family member with a mental health condition, inclusive of the co-occurring stuff we've talked about today. It goes along with this manual that's interactive, allows you to kind of track what you're doing, go through some exercises that helps you kind of think through what's going on in your own family mental health journey. So I very much encourage everybody to check that out if you get a chance. So please do. And of course, you know, you can reach out to Charlotte and Kirsten directly if you have any questions about anything in there. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we're planning another session on family mental health. That's going to be coming up on February 19th at 2 o'clock Eastern, the same time, and that's also a Wednesday. So we'll be putting out an email and an announcement about that about a couple weeks before it happens. You'll be able to register. We encourage you to come back and join us again because these are always valuable conversations and we're always happy to have them well attended. Again, here's everybody's email address one last time in case you want to get a chance to copy it down before we sign off. So yes, reach out to Kirsten or Charlotte directly. You can reach out to us here at CAFÉ TAC at cafetacenter@gmail.com. And as I mentioned at the top, once we get through with our conversation today, the recording is going to get posted on our website. It's going to be right there in the article about this session, and it will also be posted on that TAC trainings page where recordings to everything we've done are listed. So you'll be able to find it in both those places. Usually takes Zoom about an hour to get that processed and ready to view. But, you know, if you left early, you want to go back and watch something, whatever, it'll all be there for you to check out. So with that, thanks very much, Kirsten and Charlotte. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having us, Jeremy and John.
Yes.
Always a pleasure.
Kirsten, yeah, you stay warm, and Charlotte, you have fun at the beach. And John, Merry Christmas, as always. Thanks, everybody.
See you all
and
in February.
We'll see. Yes, it never ends. We'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.